On August 20th, 2016, Frank Ocean released his 4-year-awaited second album, Blonde, the much-anticipated follow-up to his smashing debut, Channel Orange, where we saw him go through not just the concepts of duality and relationship, but also identity and what Frank was experiencing as the success of Channel Orange brought him fame and success that he had been looking for most of his life. Throughout the album, he details the rise to that, and then also how the hole that was inside of him that he was hoping would be filled by this level of success quickly became larger. In this video, we're going to look at how that journey compares to Jim Carrey's similar journey towards attainment and achievement in acting, and how the two of them realized that what they thought was going to bring them peace ended up bringing more mayhem than they wanted. Let's get into it. Whether Frank intended to or not, more so something that came across as he was looking back on his past relationships, how he acted in those relationships and outside of those, and then after he's reflecting on everything that's happened since he attained his fame and his fortune, how that actually didn't end up changing him in the way he thought it would. He ended up being the same person with now money and fame, but as he looked backwards on Blonde and he tracks these forms of identity and these forms of relationship through his life, I think a natural, if not intentional, pattern emerged where his behavior and his tone in these relationships and towards these other people actually reflects his desire to attain that. And then once he did, he's now reflecting on them with more peace and understanding of the fact that what he wanted from all these relationships was immediately tied to what he wanted for himself in the future. But on Blonde, we're already in the future looking back on the past. So whether he wanted to or not, I believe you'll see through this video how we can track the idea of the arrival fallacy and the fact that when we actually get to our goals, if we had staked our entire happiness on them, they're never actually going to give us what we need. Now, in short, the arrival fallacy is really just the expectation that attaining a certain goal, whether it's a fitness goal, a health goal, an income goal, a job, an occupation, a relationship, a status, a car, a house, a certain family measurement that relates to what we're supposed to be doing, is going to react and bring us some sort of permanent happiness. Now, there's no doubt that when we achieve something we've been working for a long time, there's an aspect of joy and fulfillment that we feel. But as we'll go through this video, from Jim Carrey to Olympic athletes, we'll see how that's not actually the case. And more so frequently, it's this striving towards that goal that's actually bringing us the happiness. And so once we reach one of those levels, that joy is short-filled, and as long as we know that we're going to have to repeat that process over and over again, that happiness can be sustained, but not accomplished in one act. On the opening track, Nikes, we see Frank, in my mind, setting that goal from the first time. Now, we know through interviews that Frank Ocean used to scour luxury magazines as someone who couldn't afford things like BMWs and Mercedes, as cars will be a repeating theme throughout this video and is obviously a prominent theme in Frank's life. On the track Nikes, we hear him talking about girls that want a ring like Carmelo, and the title of it, Nikes, to me is him saying, at the time when I was a kid cutting out these magazines looking at BMWs, his goal for financial reward was something that we oftentimes have already and that everybody can experience. We all want to have the Nike shoes and the cool designer brands that seem attainable to us, which are a level above perhaps what we're shopping at the current rate. That idea of setting the goal of Nikes is going to set our tone here, and while we're going to be mostly ignoring the actual relationships and the dynamics that Frank says and speaks on literally throughout the album, more so we're going to be looking at the energy surrounding these, the title tracks, and the sounds and the sonics that come along with these to show how, as he reflects on these relationships and we get closer and closer to the present moment of Frank Ocean in 2016, how those sounds and sonics are symbols of the environments that he was going through. And so we can track those environments to see how they're playing into Frank's psyche, as he describes very often that they're just chords and they're just words. Really, when Frank Ocean's making music, he knows about a feeling that he's trying to describe. So if he just sees them as chords and words, I think taking them at face value would be doing them an injustice, because through many and sometimes dozens of iterations of these songs, it was very intentional for him to try to find something that matched the emotion that he had when trying to describe this point in his life. And so on this opening track, where he's setting a modest and, again, a somewhat achievable feeling goal that many people have had in their lives, it reminded me of Jim Carrey's infamous story.
Yourself a check? I heard that you did. Is that true?
I wrote myself a check for $10 million for acting services rendered, and I gave myself 5 years, or 3 years maybe, and I dated it Thanksgiving 1995, and I put it in my wallet, and I kept it there, and it deteriorated and stuff, but then just before Thanksgiving 1995, I found out that I was going to make $10 million on, I think it was Dumb and Dumber, maybe.
Dumb and Dumber, yeah. So you visualize yourself like...
Now, as we go, we won't always stop to track Jim Carrey, but I'm sure anybody who's familiar with Frank is likely familiar with Jim Carrey's journey to his own version of peace in the world that he explains had nothing to do with money at all. So on Nikes, we're setting this, and then throughout the rest of the album, we'll see how that original goal that Frank had to be able to afford these things gets translated over and over again. And that feeling that happiness or sadness are both fleeting feelings is translated directly onto the next song, Ivy, which is about a failed relationship, and Frank is somewhere between the ages of 21 to 23 likely, as this relationship seems to be occurring in 2009. Now, the part of this that I found to be the most symbolic of the album as a whole was, again, this recognition that he has in this relationship where he's not a kid anymore. He says it, I ain't a kid no more. And through that, he's looking back on this relationship with some peace involved, because even at 21 to 23 years old, he's calling himself and saying he's not a kid, but he's recognizing that the growth that he's made from being a teenager is still the same person. And the idea of him calling himself a kid is kind of humorous in hindsight, because at 21 to 23 years old, you're kind of an adult to people in high school and in middle school, and the versions of ourselves that we've known up until then. We feel so grown. But then obviously, as we get into our 30s and 40s, we then become still looking back at our 21 to 23-year-old self and thinking of that person as a kid. We're in this perpetual cycle of feeling like we have something to strive for, getting it in one version or another, and then recognizing that we're going to have to do the same thing over and over again. Now, moving into the next song, Pink and White, it's important to bring up the idea that seasons are a big part of this album. And I think it's a good thing that seasons are also how I see attaining goals and achievement in life. Spring is the fun time. It's what we're in right now, where we're setting the goals and we're kind of figuring out what that's going to look like, what that process is going to look like, what marathon we're going to sign up for, what job we're going to apply for, a promotion we're going to seek. Anything like that is kind of the fun part. It's when this goal still feels like something that will change us in some way, and we're not even sure of what that's going to look like yet. We're not even sure of what the repetitive actions we're going to have to put into it will be in order to attain that goal. So on the song Pink and White, the sky literally being pink and white kind of resembles this spring feeling where it's hopeful, and he talks about driving down the road and it's black and yellow. Then on this song, we also see that Frank's lover at the time is telling him to take in the world, as he tells him, I won't close my eyes. And as we do that, we start to recognize that the pink and white sky is something that we have no control over. We can look at the future with optimism, but we know at other times the future will seem bleak. It's just the way life goes. But the black and yellow road is something that we ourselves choose to drive down. And as Frank opens his eyes and recognizes that he won't have any control of what the future actually brings, it's him starting to understand that what he does have control over are his own actions. How far does he drive down the road? How fast? What is he driving when he does it? Who's with him when he does it? All things that we're asking ourselves as we go to see who's going to be a part of this next phase in our life. Who's supporting us in our endeavors? Who's clowning us for our endeavors? Or who are the ones who are saying we can and can't do it? All of these, while they can hurt from people we thought we loved, are an important part of the process. And on the song Pink and White, he also sings that it's all downhill from here, which to me I just always heard, and as I listen to the album over and over again, I can't escape the idea that he meant that as in one way, because duality and two versions is a part of this whole process that's important. But in regards to his level of fame and achievement and money attainment, we understand that the downhill aspect is something that will further and further bring him into a state of unease and bring him less and less joy over time. So when he says it's all downhill from here on Pink and White, I also think about the fact that this song is one of the more beautiful parts, and it's pleasing in many different ways. Its structure as a song is something that we're used to, and also the sounds and the landscape that we're thinking about of a pink and white sky is something that's also very light. It feels good. The song feels like it's birthed in peace and happiness, and one would hope that that feeling is the only one that we have moving forward. But since it's all downhill from here, I think we'll quickly see that the rest of the album is actually Frank's understanding that that pink and white sky and the hope of that future being one that brings permanent happiness and peace, or nirvana, as he mentions multiple times over the album. His striving towards that ends up bringing him more and more of the darkness and the grayness that he didn't want. Now, on the next track, we'll see Be Yourself, a voicemail from one of Frank's friends, his mother, telling him not to do drugs and essentially not to indulge in anything or anyone who separates us from who we are. And on a literal form in Blonde, that results in something where Frank is processing his drug use and his own identity and who he's doing them with. But for our journey, I think it's more of something abstract. It's all of the things that we could use to distract ourselves as we're going on this journey and trying to attain these goals. Essentially, if it's TV or weed or alcohol or attention or social media, all of these things that we use to try to numb the pain and really more so numb the fear that we're never actually going to get where we want to go. These are helpful things and they're good in moderation, but I think we see often in our society these being used as a crutch and more than anything a distraction and a form of procrastination against actually working towards what we want. His friend's mother is warning him about drugs because they'll turn him into someone that he doesn't want to be. For instance, weed makes you sluggish, stupid, lazy, and unconcerned. Now, if that's what it's going to make you, obviously that's not very conducive to working hard and doing the grind that it takes in order to get where you want to go. So this warning is almost Frank recognizing that, in hindsight, all of the warnings that she made, if he didn't adhere to them at least slightly, he may have found himself in this hedonistic cycle of just numbing the fact that he wasn't where he wanted to be, and thus would have at least prolonged and perhaps eliminated the possibility of him actually going to where he wants to go. Which ties in directly to the next track, of course, lyrically one that's doned in a lot of drug use and partying and seemingly hedonistic behavior that goes against Be Yourself on a literal form. When we look at it from the metaphorical form of just detaching ourselves from who we are, we see that on the song Solo, as he's talking about a party and many things that are seemingly just lighthearted and fun in nature, as he's talking to this person, whether it's partying or fighting and these things that we get into as young people, we find ourselves feeling like we're in a sense of summertime. It's a fun and games time in life. He's going through all these things, but the separation from himself is something that we all go through as we're growing up, and something that we also go through as we're trying to change our life dramatically. As we're going and trying to attain our goals, we end up separating ourselves, and for Frank, the aggression comes from likely the isolation that he's feeling in these times from a drug perspective in the literal form, but when we look at it from him trying to attain his dreams of becoming a singer-songwriter later in life, likely that isolation was coming in the same form, as he was surely spending more time in the studio, less time doing these parties and meeting new people and doing those things. This feeling of isolation that we get as we move towards the completion of our goal is something that we also feel. And for most of us who our family and friends are the most important parts of our life, if we're isolating ourselves from them, even in the idea of becoming something better, we're still going against what we want to be doing. If we want to get healthier for our family and then we start spending a lot more time in the gym and exercising, in a way, there's kind of an imbalance of what we want to be doing. We're doing these things for our family while also isolating ourselves away from them. Same thing if we're working for a promotion and trying to upgrade our family's lifestyle or any other goal that we're achieving. The fact of the matter is, especially before we've mastered what that process looks like of discipline and step by step slowly getting to where we want to go, at some point there's usually an imbalance if we're not careful. Now, this whole album, make no mistake, is in one way not necessarily Frank saying this is what it is to attain a goal, but more so warning us that if we're not careful, we can overindulge in the idea that, again, this is the one answer to our life's problems. But if we completely cut our family off from ourselves and the idea and the aspiration towards doing something that's good for them, that imbalance can come in and that feeling of isolation and frustration can build as well. On the song Solo, the use of a matador and a bull in the sky and the dichotomy of heaven and hell is used multiple times. And to me, I think it's the inner turmoil that he's feeling as he's trying to get to where he wants to go, and he knows it's what he's supposed to be doing, but at the same time, it's also like he's fighting himself. He's both the bull and the matador. There's heaven and hell because while this is a feeling of hellish, downtrodden, and gritty desire to do something big in our lives, there's also heaven in that as we can slowly see our goals start to become more and more real, or as we take each step along the path. So this song Solo is kind of a direct response to Be Yourself, and these interludes over the album seem to represent some sort of shift in the album, or perhaps separating them into phases, but nothing seems to be concrete because these stories that we get also aren't linear. We'll frequently jump between the pitched up vocals that he uses on Nikes to represent youth, and they're not used only in the first 3 tracks and you don't see them, they're sprinkled throughout the album. Which means that Frank is looking back at different times in his life as he's trying to contextualize how he got to where he is. Just like when we look at memories, it's not like we only look from kindergarten through middle school and then to high school and then to college. Whatever we're feeling at a time would be reminiscent of something that we've experienced in the past. It's not always the next chronological thing in our life, but more so of a feeling that we had at different times. So yes, we're in summer, but not necessarily chronologically moving through Frank's life or even through his journey to success and fame. But the song Solo, now representing the summertime, kicks us off immediately with this feeling of lighthearted fun, going to parties, having them get shut down by the police, and all of that feeling like the biggest thing we could be doing in our lives at that time. Which brings us to the song Skyline 2, a title that where Solo saw us in isolation and feeling so low in our aspiration towards what we're working for, Skyline 2 feels like one of the most important songs on the album, as Frank is talking about the speeding up of time, which in the macro sense comes as we age. We're only processing memories when they're new to us, and as we get older, less and less becomes new. But on the micro sense, when it comes to the idea of attaining your goals, on the song Skyline 2, he says multiple times how day is turning into night and then also night turning into day. There's 5 times where it switches. He said it's a pretty long, fast year flew by, and it's a long third gear in this car. These things that represent the long days that come with hard work when we're working towards a long-term goal, but obviously repetition is a necessary part of it. Just like as we get older, where we were young, there was a practice on Monday, an event for the school on Tuesday, something going on with our sport or with our friends on Wednesday, and every day was so exciting. We're making so many new memories. As we get into adulthood, we see that those things are happening less and less. And also as we're working through these processes of trying to improve ourselves, the times in the spring where everything was new and we're brainstorming what's it going to be, what is it going to look like, what are my goals for it, what do I have to do to get there. In the summertime that we're in right now, when it comes to attaining our goals, our actions have become repetitive. They feel like long days, but it's also speeding up as this song is going through days literally very quickly, all in one song. Frank's rapping cadence on here is also a very direct and blunt, something that we don't see on many other parts of the album. And I think it's because it's him kind of just saying that this is what's happening, and again, in a micro and a macro sense. So while it's a shorter and a more direct song, I think the sounds around it and the symbolism regarding it, again, play perfectly into the idea that things do speed up, and the first time you do anything might be exciting, but the 30th time you do it, you don't even remember doing it. You're not making any memories, and so then when you look back on the year, it kind of flew by because each day from one to the next just all melds together. We saw him isolating on solo, and the title Skyline 2 feels like he's on his journey and his ascension to where he wants to go. But as he's on that and getting more and more closer to it, the days are actually kind of melding together and the years are flying by. We kind of start to lose time as we do this, if we're not careful. It brings us to what I know I'm not alone in saying is one of, if not my favorite songs on the album, Self-Control. Now, it starts out with the Poolside Convo intro, which obviously is an extended song Frank has performed live and details his life in New Orleans and features a lot of lean and cocaine use. So it's a time when he's still dissociated from reality in a way, but that dissociation he portrays through a relationship, a failed relationship. And again, knowing that Frank is describing all of these with the understanding of what's to come, he describes this relationship as being something where they're not on the same wavelength, and Frank's not really concerned with that. What he's concerned with is the knowledge that he's going to be achieving something very soon, and so anybody in his life before that level of success and fame is almost an impartial point in it. It's something that's inconsequential in reality because Frank's only focused on getting to that next level in life that he's looking for. Now, this whole song is obviously about self-control, but there's a dichotomous aspect of it that Frank is subtly putting in here. This person that he's going to see, he said he shows up like a UFO, meaning he probably wasn't expected, and he knows this person's moving on with his life and has someone else, which, like I said, Frank's fine with because he knows he's on a different path. The only thing he's thinking about is the level of success he's trying to get to, and in the meantime, he wants some companionship and some love and some sex like everybody else does. But the person that he's talking about is trying to move on into a different relationship. Frank's fine with that, but that person's trying to practice self-control and trying not to entertain going back to Frank. But Frank just shows up, and so he's recognizing that he's practicing the opposite of self-control. This dichotomous juxtaposition to me is a signal of when in balance, our striving towards what we're trying to accomplish can make everybody around us better. If we can find a way to be working on these things while also staying true to ourselves, as opposed to Frank, who's abandoning that at times and his obsession towards getting to where he wants to go. That dichotomous nature is brought in to show that while it can be good in balance, when out of balance, you're actually hurting those around you. Now, there is a track between Self-Control and Nikes, but I hesitate to call it a song because to me, I always heard it as more of a kind of half song, half interlude. The words that he uses in the first 30 seconds of the 1 minute track details a date that he's gone on. It's a one-time thing. There's nowhere that it's really going, which to me just shows that on Good Guy, he's talking about a good guy who's setting him up with people to go on dates on, but he's not really actually able to attain any meaningful relationships. Again, the obsessive nature of him trying to move towards where he's going kind of blinds him from the ability to be able to do this. That's partnered with this person that he's on a date with also speaking a lot, and Frank doesn't really have any ability to relate to him, and he doesn't really have any desire to either. Now, the reason why I see this as more of an interlude is because that obsessive quality about the song and him not being able to have these meaningful relationships is detailed with the idea of one date and one done. It's a single date that he goes on, and there's nothing further from that, again, because he's not able to have it. But the end of it then switches to the same sound that we hear on all the interludes. Again, if we're looking at these interludes as changes and phases in Frank's life, this song being not a full interlude means that things are beginning to change, but they're not quite there yet. It's kind of a middle piece representing how the obsessive nature is, again, further driving him from what he knows. And at the end, during this second half interlude portion, we hear two guys talking. One of them's just kind of saying that don't need to worry about girls anymore, don't worry about it, you could have whatever you want, and the person who he's talking to, who seems to be a friend, can't really get a word in. One's literally talking over the other, just like how on his date, one person's talking so much. And so what the second half of that interlude represents to me is that Frank is now starting to not be able to relate to even his friends, the people who he would want to rely on the most, while not being able to have meaningful relationships romantically. He also feels like he's starting to get trampled on by the people who were in his circle the whole time. Now, we know from context and from later in the album that when Frank does reach his level of success, he quickly realizes the people he had in his circle he couldn't always trust, whether they were there before or not. So again, as we start to move towards our goals and attaining it, we start to relate more to Jim Carrey's progression in his own level of success and fame, where he said that,
I've often said that I wished people could realize all their dreams in wealth and fame, and so that they could see that it's not where you're going to find your sense of completion.
And again, now on the next song, we see Good Guy playing directly into Nights. He opens it with a more upbeat feeling from the Good Guy sound as he's going around the city, around the block. Everybody needs you. And as he's doing that, he's kind of communicating the idea that he's now becoming what he wanted to become. He's got interviews, or he's got studios to meet up with for Jay-Z and Beyonce. Everybody needs a part of him. But then he almost immediately goes into the idea that you can't trust anybody. Nobody's actually being truthful to your face. Nobody's telling you the truth of what's actually going on. And so again, we're seeing his isolation from the past, the isolation from what he once knew. Again, like I mentioned, this is where we see that his circle is starting to thin in a sense, and that's what happens as we start to attain our goals. If we replace unhealthy actions with healthy ones, the group that we used to do the unhealthy things with oftentimes don't come with us to the healthy parts. And then the ones who do, we know are there for the right reasons, hopefully, as long as they're not trying to get anything out of us like a lot of Frank Ocean's circle was. Now, Nights is the first mention of meditation and recognition that some people from our past just aren't going to be part of our present or even our future. But the way he flippantly approaches these people in the first half of the song is, if I get my money right, I won't even need you. He's kind of dismissing this person and the placement that they have in this life and recognizing that he's using them in hindsight. But at the time, he's almost laughing in their face. That's the feeling that he had. Now, this is obviously a warning on how we treat people on the way up, because, of course, while people can be negative towards us when we're trying to achieve something, again, as we've seen previously, we can also be negative towards other people. And Frank is recognizing that on Nights as he builds up to the change with Channel Orange and how everything kind of got loud after that. He said he's working late, and that's when the beat changes into something that feels like it's building to something. All he says is that he needs to get his money right. His survival depends on it if he's going to attain the first level of desires that he had that we saw on Nikes. He has to do this. He has to work every night, and he needs to get his money right. He repeats it for a reason, because he believes it. Also on this song, we see him say things like that he's rolling marijuana for a cheap vacation, and throughout the song, he's dropping off the sex partner to, again, go back and work at the studio. And he's needing a cheap vacation like marijuana because the monotony of his life is now starting to set in, while also being exciting, as the sound around his words represent. At other times, he says he wants to see Nirvana, again, something we'll see multiple times, but he doesn't want to die yet. He'll also at many points reference Kurt Cobain directly, while obviously Nirvana referencing the band name, but Kurt Cobain being someone who was also consumed by the fame and the excitement of what it is to be on star on the biggest stage. So as he's doing this, he's recognizing, and the sounds are representing, that it's starting to speed up. His world around him is starting to get faster, but he's going crazy every day and every single night trying to make this come true. It's like a job to him at this point because he hasn't gotten all of the fruits that he's looking for. He feels himself slipping into something different and fears that it'll come to an end like Nirvana did with Cobain's death. Nirvana's supposed to be something that's permanent, but he's already meditating on the idea that it might not be impermanent, though he's not sure of that yet. But before he has a second to think about it, again, as the sound and the beat starts to build and to build and to build, as he's starting to recognize that he's getting closer to what he wants, but he's also realizing that that might not be the end of his suffering. It might not bring him the nirvana that he's looking for. Before he has a chance to stop, think, and maybe change course or change actions to the flippant nature he was bringing this person in his past, the song switches. So as we go through Nights, we see these mentionings of Nirvana, we see these mentionings of Kurt Cobain, and this kind of feeling of Channel Orange, or even the moments before Channel Orange, especially its release, where he's mostly known as a songwriter in the build-up from Nostalgia Ultra, and while working with people like Justin Bieber, Beyonce, as many other pop artists at the time, we see him now starting to recognize that everything he's wanted is happening and coming true. His times from back in New Orleans or even Houston, when he would dream about music being his whole life, now are becoming real. These moments are starting to build with Frank, and again, he's starting to push these people away, but we're recognizing that he's looking back on this moment. At the time, it was probably the most exciting thing for him, but as we look at this part of the album now, it's a very small part of the album as a whole. It's one half of one song, maybe a little bit more. So in that sense, we get the feeling that actually this time in his life when we thought everything would have begun to get cured, he was thinking that at the time, I'm not going to need you in a little bit. These people that in his mind he was only using because he had to, the need for them to be in his life is no longer there. At least he hopes so. He's been waiting for this all his night. Not all his life, but all his night. All this time when it feels like he's been putting into his craft and having to show up over and over and over again. All those nights he was doing that, thinking one day he would make it there. Now we're actually at the precipice of that happening. He's been waiting all his night, and he wants to see Nirvana, but he doesn't want to die. He's starting to recognize, even before it's fully happened, that he is going to end up in a place where his stardom could actually get to the level he wanted, and now he's starting to get scared of it. As we track his tracking of Nirvana and Kurt Cobain and White Lighters and 28 and everything that goes along with that death in the 27th Club, I start to see it more transitioning his ideals of fame from something that he's looking up towards, again, on the first half of this album, when we're thinking of Nikes and life is still open and fruitful, and we haven't attained anything that we've wanted, but we also haven't failed at anything that we wanted. It's why being a kid is so fun. We don't have the weight of success, and nor do we have the weight of failure. But as we continue through the album and we bring up this Nirvana aspect more and more, I get a more sense of imposter syndrome. Like he feels like he's not supposed to be here, and like his time within this will be short if he's not careful. Obviously, now is a good time to discuss Frank Ocean's allure in general. He's never around very much, and as he thinks about fame and as we kind of process fame, he's always been the antithesis of what it looks like. We know that now in hindsight, but as we look back, this Night Songs feels like the first time where he's starting to meditate on all of this. It's a literal mention of meditation, surely, but we also see a direct contrast in this song between him saying those things, like when I get my money right, I won't need you, but then at the very beginning of the song also talking about how the people in Los Angeles have taken money from him, taken advantage of him, and he doesn't even know who's being honest with him anymore. We see the kind of build-up and the mistakes that we can make on the way up when we think that we're going to get to some level where we'll no longer need anybody around us, or even that we'll be better than other people. We might get to a level where we aren't in the same wavelength and we're not in the same arena as others, but it's never to the point where we're better than someone else or we don't need them in general. Ideally, this is kind of the way of thinking that there's going to get to a point where you don't need anyone. But Frank also, in the same song, is talking about the people who he used to need, and the ones he did rely on when they betrayed him gave him this sense of isolation and loneliness that we're experiencing on the song. So as all of these things are starting to wrap around, there's a reason why I think a chaotic music comes in before the beat change. It's to show the speeding up of his thoughts, the speeding up of his travels and actions, and then right when we get to the beat change, we get a sudden suspension. Now, at this point, Frank is fully enveloped into the throes of fame and into all of the things that come along with it. And in that suspension, now the excitement and all the things that were happening that seem to happen very fast. As that beat builds to the switch, I always heard it as performing on Jimmy Fallon, or all of the parts that come along with the marketing tours for releasing an album that he obviously had to be a part of. He was still on a label and still part of a studio and had contractual fulfillments that he had to do. So all of that, while it seemingly would have thought to have been the most exciting part of it, it's also the part that we get the least of. It happens quickly because that's the reality of achieving our goals and attaining everything. It's a slow build and a slow build and a slow build, and then right before we crack the code, everything starts to speed up and it clicks into a way that eliminates time entirely. Every night, every day, every night, every day. And so that suspension and that feeling of isolation will really carry us through the rest of the album, as now that he's alone, he has more time to think about things. And I think as we move through, we'll see that as he's thinking about things, he is starting to recognize that the things that he wanted didn't actually bring him any of the peace or happiness that he thought it would. He's back to feeling isolated, whereas the whole first half of the album before his fame, he was constantly hanging out with friends, going to parties, and having good times. So what changed? Well, what's changed is now he's got nowhere to go. He's gotten to where he wanted. He's the Olympian who's just won the gold medal. He's the actor who finally just got their breakout role. And so then from there, after you've achieved everything you want, as Frank does immediately after the beat switch, there's nowhere to go but backwards. Because there was one singular focus for so long, once we get there, there's no road in front of us. There's no black and yellow. There's no pink and white sky. There's no Nikes to strive for. It's just night. But he's also looking at money in general. He talks about the bishops in his hometown in New Orleans preaching self-made millionaire status and other things while he and his family were struggling to eat, struggling to keep their homes together. So almost immediately after this beat switch, instead of it growing to something and crescendoing to something in the future, everything slows down. And while the rest of the album won't always be slow, it will feel like a downward trajectory until a point where we can have some reflection and some peace and closure and move backwards. But at this time, he's looking back at those bishops in New Orleans. He's looking at the people who had it active in Houston at the time. He's looking at Katrina taking out his home studio and forcing him to move to Texas, where he then talks about needing to get out of Texas and get to LA. And then the whole rest of the album, he's constantly looking backwards more and more until obviously we get the full picture of hindsight and reflection that would become Blonde in general. But at this point, it's the feeling of there not being any future until he's able to bring that closure with his past, which is probably why we'll end with the song Futura Free. But we'll get there later. Now, that loneliness and feeling of isolation leads us perfectly into the next song, Solo Reprise, which obviously on the aspect of being solo works as well, but I also see the idea of features and someone like Andre 3000, who on an album where Beyonce is a backup vocalist, for someone to have their entire own track on here, I can't imagine it's coincidence. So the isolation and the separation from identity that Frank's been talking about that built up, and then we saw the crux of on the night's beat switch, leads us perfectly to this idea of him not even being himself, and Andre 3000 being a sort of silhouette for him to take over in order to describe Frank's feelings here. Now, there's two other differences that I think are important to mention on this song from the original song Solo in the first half. While they're both only one instrument and it sounds like a piano or an organ of some type, the beat is just increased slightly. Again, now this is still representing the height of the fame, the height of the noise, and the isolation that Frank feels as he's solo. But also I think it's important to recognize the first few mentions of solo in the first half of the album on the song were pretty clearly about being solo, about being alone. But Andre 3000 immediately counters that on this half of the album with, instead of feeling alone, while Frank does feel alone, he also feels so low that he can see under the skirt of an ant. So with that in mind, while both songs, Solo and Solo Reprise, involve ideas of being alone and being low, We start with feeling alone on the first one, and we start with feeling low on the second one. But we're just now at Frank's fame and his height, so why would he be feeling that? In my opinion, I think that clip of Jim Carrey ties in perfectly here. It's because Frank is now starting to feel like everything that he was and everything about who he is, now that he's attained what he wanted, it's almost a different version of himself entirely. Like Jim Carrey says, all of his characters were characters, including Jim Carrey. Frank Ocean mentioned in a New York Times article that it even took some adjustments to people calling him Frank on the streets. His name's Lonnie to the people who were close to him. But the world and the majority of the population, like we mentioned before, now sees him as Frank Ocean. So that separation from identity also adds into the fact that he can't get high anymore, and that's why we're feeling so low. Can't get high because there's no new experiences to even register for Frank. He's done all the drugs likely that he wanted. He had access to all the parties and clubs. He's now past the idea of him being a B or even a C-list star. He's officially risen to the ranks to be someone who everyone recognizes and paparazzi's constantly looking for. At the same time, as he's getting through to here and getting to this level where people that he may have looked up to or at least wanted to get to the same level of them, he's disillusioned by the art now that he's working there within it. He probably sees, like NBA players have talked about and anybody in the professional world mentions, which is it's very obvious the people who see it as a money-making opportunity or see it as a job and the ones who are doing it for art. And now that Frank's at this level that he wanted to reach before, maybe not to people he looked up to or maybe to ones he did, but nevertheless, he's completely into the throes of fame, and as he looks at his peers, he's probably disillusioned not only by them, but also by the industry itself. The record companies that have their hands in how songs are made, the behind-the-scenes aspects of releasing music and writing music that none of us will probably ever be able to fathom, but Andre 3000 represents that by talking about ghostwriters and rappers at a time when it was becoming more and more popular to see and find out that rappers were releasing music that other people had written. But along with the disillusionment with the industry, with ghostwriters, as Andre 3000 talks about, Three Stacks also moves directly into talking about how throwing money at strip clubs and getting girls and having them over all the time is no longer something that he really needs. I'm guessing this is the same moment that Frank realized all of the brand names that he was aspiring to, whether it's Nikes or BMW or anything that we've read about him, it wasn't going to bring him what he wanted. Andre 3000 raps about ripping the logo off of a polo. Now there's a hole. And Frank is literally saying that the holes that he had that he thought were going to be filled by being able to afford all these things, they're still holes. Where he thought the logo would fill it, there's a hole there. And now the hectic nature of fame and the touring and the constant demand for Frank is most sonically potent. We're on the song Pretty Sweet, and he sounds like he's losing it a little bit. He's talking about racing to the edge, having faux friends or fake friends, and taking risks and absorbing all of the hype right now. And as he's doing that, I think he's conveying to us this idea of the fact that he can't really get a grip on this new phase in his life. It's like a cocaine high. Great on the way up, but then the idea of it ever slowing down or stopping is almost unbearable for us to imagine. The manic sound builds and builds and builds until he just starts repeating that he's on this side. He's on this side. And again, on all of the times I've ever listened to Blonde, this to me was almost a indicative on the same song, Oh My Decide, by Travis Scott and Quavo, where they are literally and lyrically talking about the difference between their experiences and their perspectives for when they were poor versus when they were on this side and they were made a lot of money on this side and doing a lot of drugs on that side. There's a clear distinction on that song, and this song to me speaks to the same message that this side is different from where I came from. This then ends with a choir of kids singing. No longer is it Frank's pitched up vocals, because that was him singing about his childhood from the identity that he belonged to. These are actual different kids because he's an actual different person. He's outside of himself, though now still thinking about the time in his life when he was a child, but this time it's not the exact experience that he went through. Instead, this is more of the present day, the time in Channel Orange's success when he's probably seen as a sucker and being pretty sweet because of his naivety in the music scene. That naivety is probably what got him not only taken advantage of by his friends and the people who wouldn't tell him the truth that we were looking at on Nights, but also is probably building to his friction with the label and Def Jam Records that he would obviously famously break out of with the release of Endless that came right before Blonde. So all of these things are now tying together, and as all of this mania and craziness is going on around him, Facebook story also comes in to describe someone who at the time, and maybe it's 2008 to 2011, 2012, somewhere in there, Facebook was still not relied upon on everyday use. So Facebook story is detailing someone who his girlfriend sees the online world as being some sort of a reflection on reality. It wasn't supposed to be a presentation, it was just supposed to be an update. Somebody goes away for the summer, it's a great way to keep in touch. But on Facebook story, we see the two worlds of the physical and the digital now coming together, where people are expecting things of you from the digital world in the physical, or vice versa. To me, this is just included here so that Frank can further cement the fact that he's now different. And this idea of Frank Ocean being a part of his reality and a part of who he is now is no longer a part at all. It's actually the majority. Most of the world, when they see his face, think Frank Ocean, not Lonnie Bro. Nobody's thinking that because Frank Ocean is what everybody thinks of him as. And then the final point with Facebook story is to remember that the interlude music that's played here and on Be Yourself and at the end of some of the other songs are usually showing transitions and phases in life. So as we move forward from here, where we've just experienced the summer part, the fun and the light and the enjoyment and the experience of it, at the second half of summer, as we start to move into what might be looked at as autumn or fall, we actually see that he wasn't able to enjoy it. And to me, that's kind of like those last couple weeks of summer before you have to go back to school. It's almost like at the height and at the peak of it, everything's fun, you're creating memories, and then as he starts to attain his level of success that he's looking for, he's also moving closer to fall, like we used to move closer to going back to school. So all of that just signals to me that the rest of the album will be him reckoning with this level of fame. This was him trying to help us experience what it might feel like, and then the rest of this is the fallout from it. So now we've seen that mania come in, we've seen Frank try to reckon with this, and like I mentioned, now we've heard Facebook story where the digital world and the physical seem to have both melded together and both washed away entirely. Frank's in a new phase in his life, and there's no going back. And if we do see that interlude as a moving of seasons, which, again, I'm not saying Frank was doing that intentionally, it's just helpful for contextualization reasons, this would be fall. And in fall, what I always think of are late night drives with a cool kind of twinge in the air, or just kind of the reflection on the year before as we start moving into the holiday season, where it'll be mostly absorbed by more activities and family and end of year reports and things of that nature. Fall is almost like the only time we have to both be still going through life, but also looking backwards on where we are. And I think the song Close to You represents that perfectly. It's a cover of the Carpenters song, which the original song by the Carpenters is very light, very early morning in the summertime feeling, but now he's added a Stevie Wonder twist to it, and he's modulating his voice in a way while singing that song that's almost tainting it in a way. Now, Close to You is also lyrically represented when he says things like, I wasn't devastated. This is a relationship where Frank was fine with them both agreeing to move on in different directions because, again, likely that relationship ended when he was still striving for something in the future. But now that's no longer here, and instead what he's left with is a big mess that he's kind of struggling to get through. He says, you could have held my hand through this. He's recognizing that, I didn't feel anything then, but as we all likely at some point feel with people that we've moved on from, we'll at least ask the question and wonder whether or not our life would look different or better or worse if they were in it today. You could have held my hand through this, and in this manic expression of his life, he's just wishing someone was close to him. But again, we're further isolated from people than we were on the first half of the album because it's an inherent part of achieving what we want. People start to separate from us as we change who we are, sometimes intentionally for worse, and other times just naturally out of action. But more than anything, he wants someone to be close to him from his past, even though, as we saw on Nights, he may not have had the same endearment all the way up until then. Now, I think this is Frank reflecting and thinking about all these things, and then for the rest of the album, he'll be sitting with these ideas and these thoughts. Of course, one of the best ways for Frank to start contextualizing this point in his life is to reflect on why he wanted to get here in the first place. Just like we have to reflect on our goals of what we thought they were going to accomplish for us. This is reminiscent of Jim Carrey when he said, and the first thing that I saw that started to connect him with this idea of blonde that started this whole project was when he said this in an interview.
It's been part of the evolution of ego is to spend your first half of your life acquiring and adding, thinking you can add to yourself, and it looks great. I mean, it looks great when you got a cool car and you got nice clothes and you know, and you've done something that people admire. But it can never fulfill you. You can never be happy. You know what I mean? It's not where happiness comes from.
And to me, that's exactly what we're getting on White Ferrari. Like I said, there's two versions in every one of these songs, if not more. And obviously on this song, he's describing a relationship again. But I think the term White Ferrari can't be a coincidence, and considering the start of the album was with Nikes, again, something that's attainable and very common to have as a goal, while many people envision Ferraris or Lamborghinis or Maseratis, that's never something that people are usually putting into their budget and hoping to get by the end of the year, like a pair of shoes. White Ferrari to me is representative of Frank not only attaining the Nike's idea of branding that he would want, but actually moving past that to the point where he can afford any car that he has ever wanted or desired. White Ferrari then is him saying that he's gotten some affinity for where he is, but again, the sounds and the sonics on this song don't sound uplifting. They sound reflective. They sound defensive, and it seems like he's trying to cope with what he is and how his existence has led him to where he is now. When he repeats "that's life" over and over again, it sounds not like him being defeated, but almost releasing all of the tension and the pressure and stress that he put upon himself. Why would he stress out about things that 30, 40 years from now, nobody will remember? Nobody's going to care about. Now, his music, of course, will probably live on forever. We can think of that as part of when he's saying, tech companies give me immortality, but for his actions, for how he interacts with the world, the things that he has, and everything from there, again, in hundreds of years, nobody will know about, nobody will care, and then eventually humanity will in fact die out, and none of it will matter in the grandest scheme of things. But the other thing that this song also does is revert us back to the part in Andre 3000's verse on Solo Reprise where he says that he's taken off the brands and there's holes where there once was a logo. Again, Frank's obsession with cars all the way up until now, it would be foolish not to accept that and bring that into how we're contextualizing this song for itself. And how fitting. On the Boys Don't Cry magazine, Frank Ocean also talks about how he's living in London now and he doesn't actually have any need for a car. He has one out for emergencies, but he's spending most of his time e-biking around and experiencing life without one. So the fitting nature is that while he worked his whole life to be able to afford and attain and acquire all these different things, once he got to the level where he actually far surpassed it. He surpassed Nikes to be able to get to a white Ferrari, and then he surpassed the white Ferrari to get to the point where he doesn't even need a car. To me, all that this comes back to is just the fact that it's not the idea that whatever we're going towards once we're there will be complete. It's the fact that when we're going towards something, it means we are going to improve. Think about how many more drugs and failed relationships Frank would have had if he wasn't working towards the music. So in a way, it made him better and progressed him to being able to add value to society or hurt less people or hurt himself less and all of those things because of his obsession with the music. But if he thought that getting to the music and getting to the touring and the notoriety and the ability to afford all of these things was going to make him happy, now he sees that he can surpass all of those levels and still be left with this feeling of wondering where it all came from. It's not getting to where we're trying to go that matters, it's getting there at all. It's going forward, it's just not being where you are. Again, to add a cliche back into it, it's about the journey, not the destination. But instead of Frank saying this literally or describing it in an interview, instead he's made us an entire hour-long album for it. But there's still more closure that we need, and there's still some more reflexiveness that Frank's going to have to come in with to be able to really pull all of this together and find some closure with it. It is worth mentioning that on White Ferrari, Frank again is talking about a failed relationship and one with someone where the reason why it didn't work out is because Frank wanted to see more of the world. He wanted to travel, he wanted to move about and be a part of different cultures and live in different places, and this person seems to want nothing of the same. The person seems to want more of what almost everybody else wants in the world, who is just someone who can go to work and make a good living and have kids, be in the same place, buy a house, the American dream that we usually think of. And to those that are different from that, like Frank, it's kind of an impasse that you can't get past in a relationship. If one person wants to buy a house and stay in the same place for a long time, it's just almost impossible to work that out with someone who's trying to travel the world and experience new things all the time. Now, with that on White Ferrari, as we move into Siegfried, the next song on here, we'll see the same idea of that relationship translated into Frank's top production ability on the album. And to me, that usually represents the fact that he's at the peak of his fame. He's reflecting on the fact that, as he said in interviews before, there's no going back anymore. He now is Frank Ocean. There's no way for him to attain anonymity, and he can further separate himself from the public eye, but that'll never replace what it is to be truly like everybody else and anonymous to 99.99% of the world. Every time I listen to this album, when he sings about two kids in a swimming pool, all I can think about is the fact that, of course, he can have kids, of course, he can afford to buy a swimming pool, but where the person that he left in the past wanted to have something of a normal life, Frank, now recognizing that that's not possible for him anymore, is almost yearning for something like that. He wishes he could, in a way, go back, and I'm not saying he regrets all of his decisions that led him to fame, but certainly in an opportunity cost perspective, he's recognizing that what he's given up in his pursuit of fame is that normalcy. It's a normalcy he never thought he wanted before, hence why we've seen him flippantly dismiss most of his relationships up until now. And I don't think he's yearning for that person specifically, but just the idea of that being a part of his life someday. And to me, that's Frank recognizing as he's reeling from all of this experience with fame that what he wishes he could have more than anything is something he can't buy. It's to go backwards, to have that feeling of spring again, when again, we're not burdened by the success or the failures of our decisions. It's even to go back to summer when being and living in LA probably felt freeing and exciting as opposed to like a prison. He felt that both in LA and New York, which is what led him to London. And so again, he's accomplished this idea of traveling the world, but now as he looks back, it's not all roses. It's not all pink and white after all. And as for that final step, obviously it's the only thing that can ever bring us true peace, which is release. In Godspeed, he's wishing all of his past relationships, good, bad, the ones that he messed up, that other people messed up, the ones that he still has some emotions for, the ones that he don't. He simply wishes them all well. And then on top of that, I think what he's also doing is wishing those different versions of himself well too. The ones that wanted the brands, the ones that wanted the fame, the ones that had disdain for their jobs. He talks about looking down on where you came from, and to me, that's just emphasizing the fact that he now understands where he used to have indignation towards his present state in life when he was a kid or when he couldn't afford the things that he wanted, now he looks back and he doesn't look down on them. In fact, he appreciates them. There's no way for us to be where we are now without being where we were. If we like where we are, we must thank our past, and if we don't like where we are, we should thank our present for what the future will bring. And if we don't think the future will bring us what we want, then all we have to do is change it. In this track, I feel like Frank is putting all of the power and the ownership back onto himself, and thus relaying that it's the power and ownership that we have for ourselves as well. When he sings, "I Will Always Love You," I honestly always assumed he was just talking about himself. Along, of course, again, with the past relationships, but it's more about him loving himself, and regardless of the brands that he wants, regardless of the goals that he has, he's not going to do it for ego anymore, he's going to do it for himself. And as we do that, we'll know that we're doing what's best, because it is only for us instead of that ego. We're going to keep building, we're going to still be able to do the things that we wanted to do, but it'll be true to us. We'll be able to grow in the ways that we want to grow and set new goals for the right reasons instead of the wrong ones. Then he also sings that obviously there will be mountains you won't move. There will be tasks and goals that you have that you won't accomplish. And now that he's felt the feeling of accomplishing them and seeing that it's not actually as fulfilling as he thought, I think this is actually bringing him some peace. The idea that he could try to do something and not succeed at it. We've also seen him go away from his idealization of brands and things like that, and I don't think it's a coincidence that instead of making music and talking about albums in recent years, we've seen him designing his own luxury brands. While most of us will probably never be able to afford any of them, I just hope that Frank is doing this because in his mind it's his own exercise of the creativity, and instead of him chasing after other brands, it's him creating something for himself and something for himself to attain. Again, I'm never buying anything from the Homer line, and so it's nothing that I have or nothing that I can even understand, as I'm not a luxurious person, if that hasn't come across yet. But I think Frank striving for this and trying to attain it, again, is more symbolic of him separating his striving towards something that other people have power over, and instead him taking the power first and then deciding where he wants to go from there. What we know for sure is Frank doesn't need the money anymore. The idea of him creating this Homer line, I relate to it again with thinking of how Jim Carrey incorporates painting into his life now. Could he make a bunch of money off them selling Jim Carrey paintings? Of course. And are Frank's lines and Homer priced exorbitantly? Yes, they are. Now, is he doing that for money? Maybe. Is he doing it because that's just how he sees luxury brands and that's the space that he wants to be in? I think more likely. But as we do that, and again, knowing that, we're moving into this Futura Free song. It's kind of a song, it's kind of an outro, it's kind of both, but on it we see him again talking about how his goals when he started were pretty simple. If he could fuck 3 times a day and not skip a meal, he's good. Just like he just wanted Nikes at start. But then he goes immediately into talking about he makes 400, 600, 800K mama to stand on his feet mama. He's not having to work a job anymore, so it's again the realization that he's moved past what he ever wanted, and now he's in a state of not needing or wanting anything. And what do we do with that? It's like winning the $300 million lottery. There's a reason why people lose it. It's because when we get everything we want, there's no friction driving us in our life anymore. And because there's no friction in his life, and he's no longer concerned or worried about the things he used to be worried about, now he's almost immediately transitioning into worrying about death. That's the only other thing that he's going to come up against in life that he won't have an answer to. Not only does he, again, ask the tech companies to give him immortality, which to me is just meaning, let my songs be out there, make sure they live on, make sure that I have this presence in the world because I've worked so long to get here. Now the only thing I can possibly think about is death and the overbearing weight that I've experienced with this fame. He expresses the desire for immortality before going into the idea of Tupac being alive and people looking for him, and I'm not saying that I think Frank thinks Tupac's alive, but I think he clearly is saying, if he was, why would you be looking for him? Frank is now at a point where he can relate to Tupac and the idea of wanting to go all the way to the point of faking your death just to get back the anonymity that he was talking about wanting on Siegfried and 2 kids in a swimming pool. While unlikely, if Tupac wasn't dead, then he could be out living somewhere with kids and a backyard and secretly stashed away money and living all of the life that he had. But instead, he was taken over by it. He was consumed by it. He was lost by it. Just like Selena. And all of that, I think, is what really leads me to the conclusion of this first half of Futura Free, which is Frank actually telling us that he was going to be doing what he's doing now. He said he was worried about fans murdering him like Selena, and references Tupac and how he has such a desire to escape that celebrity, but he's saying that the celebrity is now starting to take over. He's either going to, quote-unquote, fake his death like Tupac did, or end up really dead like Selena did. In his way, his separation from the limelight and the spotlight in the last several years is likely signaled on this part of Futura Free when he says that it's becoming overbearing for him. He talked about the album and the wait for it, and he was pretty dismissive of it in the build-up to the album and the release of it, with people, again, yelling out of Ubers and calling him Frank instead of Lonnie. But what he also was experiencing was the idea that people were expecting him to do something, that they were expecting him to show up at a certain time in order to get a certain reward, which would then be indicative of a job. Yes, obviously releasing an album is nothing like clocking into your 9 to 5, but essentially he's saying that he felt some of the same things. And so, again, I think where we transition to the end of this song and the end of the album, what we hear is a youthful skating group in California talking about the same existential questions that we adults think about all the time, except their answers are pretty simple. They like to play sports, they go to school, they want to get better at skating, they want to get better at this and that, and they're wondering how far a light year is and asking all these questions that, again, as adults, we would probably have deep and what we think would be meaningful answers to them, but the real answer is to answer just like the kids. Not do we want to get to a certain level of success and fame because it's going to bring us notoriety and ego and all these things that are going to just leave us with emptiness and bigger holes to fill, but instead, do we just want to get better at something because we want to get better at it? Does it bring us joy to see us progress and go step by step throughout that day? If we're doing that, then I think that's the message of this album, saying it's worth it. And again, as long as you're doing that without having any animosity towards your past or disdain for your present, then it's exactly the process you should be doing. It brings us the peace that Jim Carrey has now found, and his ability to understand that, yes, he does the Sonic movies for money, because he likes to buy nice stuff. I think all of us, if we had more money, would buy stuff and it would make us happier. But if we think that our happiness depends on the ability to buy that stuff, then that'll never be the case. Setting a goal, going, working for it, attaining it, does that bring happiness? Yes. Does it bring permanent, lasting peace and fulfillment? No. And that's all he's trying to say on this album, and I think that's why it closes with these kids, and also why the theory of there being 4 seasons on the album falls a bit short here at the end. Now, 2 reasons. Either one, because that idea and that theory and everything I've said in this video has absolutely no merit, whether it's intentionalized by Frank or not, or the reason why there's no winter is because the closest that we get to it on Siegfried is taken over by the release we see on Godspeed. It's almost like Frank catches and defeats the idea of winter coming in and depression and ending up like Kurt Cobain or Selena or Tupac, because he recognized in the production of this album that he actually doesn't need this anymore. He's going to get away from the limelight, from the spotlight, and even at something like Coachella, a show that I certainly would have been disappointed perhaps at the way it went down, he's still doing it for him, and you can't knock him for that. Considering he signaled all of this to us, and then also taking into account the fact that his little brother was killed, I think giving him as much time and space as he wants to act however he needs to is more than fair. And I think Frank would obviously expect us to react accordingly as well. There are still going to be people who are willing to sit outside for 12 hours at the possibility of him performing. And there's other people who would move from the deification of himself to recognizing that he's not a god, he's a guy. And he's no different from us, except that he's put the work into his dreams and gotten to the same point that Jim Carrey has, which is when he recognized they weren't the answer to all of his problems. So instead of getting to that point in Winter where he either kills himself, like Kurt Cobain, is killed by the pressure of the world and to be an image, like Tupac, or if he's simply just killed by the idea of his notoriety and his presence on the digital world as being Frank Ocean, is at some point going to drive someone to kill Frank Ocean and Lonnie Bro in the process. Now, all of that comes together, but his release of it on Godspeed, his return to the spring and summer times with these kids getting interviewed about skateboarding, I think is him signaling how to avoid that winter part in this process. Where Olympic athletes after winning gold will frequently feel empty and sad and depressed, he's saying the way to avoid that is to, again, never stake your happiness on the goal in the first place, and then once you attain the goal, to make sure you have something else in the future to move towards. Something more fulfilling, something more about us, and something more blonde. Thank you.